Shockwaves are shaking the church world today because Bishop Henry Fernandez has just dropped a bombshell. In a shocking twist, he's claiming that none other than Bishop T.D. Jakes, one of the most powerful and respected leaders in ministry, may have been behind a setup that nearly destroyed his reputation. This isn't just another church headline. If what Fernandez is saying is true, it could expose a level of betrayal and power struggle that nobody saw coming. And trust me, the truth behind this revelation might completely change the way you see both of these leaders. After years of whispers, rumors, and unanswered questions, the silence has finally been broken. Bishop Henry Fernandez is speaking out, and what he just revealed has pastors, churchgoers, and critics all asking the same chilling question. Was this all part of a bigger plan? Welcome back to the channel where we pull back the curtain on the untold stories, scandals, and controversial truths shaking the church world to its very core. And today's revelation may be one of the most shocking yet, because according to Fernandez himself, he was set up, and not just by anyone. He claims the man behind it all may be none other than one of the most powerful and respected leaders in ministry, Bishop T.D. Jakes. For years, Fernandez built a reputation as a fiery preacher, a respected leader, and a voice of authority in Christian circles. But behind the pulpit, away from the bright lights, whispers grew louder. Whispers of betrayal, whispers of sabotage, whispers that his biggest battles weren't just bad luck, but a deliberate attempt to bring him down. And now, with Fernandez finally speaking out, the truth may be even more explosive than anyone ever imagined. Fernandez is finally revealing the truth, confirming what many had assumed and blaming T.D. Jakes directly for being a key player in a plot that might have permanently destroyed his ministry. Keep watching, because we're going to dissect everything in this film, including Fernandez's ascent to power, the conflicts and rivalries inside the church, and his startling admissions that turned rumors into facts. You'll see why some people consider this to be one of the largest scandals the modern church has ever seen by the end of this story. I promise. In order to fully comprehend the significance of Bishop Henry Fernandez's latest assertions, we must first take a step back and examine his background and the reasons behind the widespread influence of his name in the Christian community. Although he wasn't born famous, Henry Fernandez had a strong sense of religion and an indisputable desire to lead. He was born in Jamaica and came to the U.S. as a young man with lofty goals and a greater purpose. His early years were difficult. He had to deal with cultural shifts, financial difficulties, and the difficulty of finding his position in a fiercely competitive spiritual field. Much like many people who seek ministry, Fernandez, however, was no ordinary preacher. He was charismatic. He had vision. Additionally, he exuded a charismatic presence that attracted listeners wherever he talked. Together with his spouse, Pastor Carol Fernandez, Henry established the Faith Center Ministries in Sunrise, Florida. In 1991, with thousands of members, several services, and a global following via radio, television, and the internet, what began as a tiny congregation of less than 300 individuals quickly expanded into a flourishing megachurch. He was a fearless, pragmatic, and unyielding leader, traits that won him both ardent supporters and scathing detractors. Fernandez, however, was doing more than just growing a church. He was gaining power. He established conferences, wrote a number of books, and made friends with some of the most influential people in the Christian world, such as Bishop T. Jakes. Their friendship appeared to many to represent church leaders' solidarity, fraternity, and respect for one another. Nevertheless, rivalries were developing under the cover of this expanding power. Fernandez came under increasing scrutiny as his status increased. Critics pointed to his emphasis on success, wealth, and material rewards as evidence that he was preaching too much about prosperity. He was defended by supporters who said he was only imparting biblical teachings about faith and provision. One thing emerged from all of it: Bishop Henry Fernandez should not be disregarded. There was weight in his voice. For better or worse, his name was rising to prominence in the black church, and his congregation attracted a lot of attention. And that's exactly what's so combustible about his current statements, because the entire church community sits up and takes notice when a world-class leader like him declares, "I was set up," and blames Bishop T.D. Jakes. We must first comprehend the history between these two influential men and the rifts that started to grow long before Fernandez's disclosure, before we can address that startling accusation. The plot then takes a turn that few anticipated. Bishop T.D. Jakes' name is unavoidable when discussing the contemporary Black church, renowned throughout the world as the lead pastor of Dallas, Texas's Potter's House. Beyond the pulpit, Jakes has established an empire. In addition to being a writer, director, and businessman, he is also maybe this generation's most significant preacher. His resources are unparalleled, his reputation is both renowned and contentious, and his reach is global. Therefore, it was only fitting that these two leaders' paths would intersect as Bishop Henry Fernandez gained notoriety. Their relationship appeared to be the epitome of Christian fraternity to the outer world. Fernandez frequently mentioned Jake as an inspiration, a mentor, and even a collaborator in several ministry activities. In return, Jake introduced Fernandez to leadership events, high-profile conferences, and media opportunities that put Fernandez in the company of influential figures in ministry circles that were inaccessible to most pastors. Their connection seemed solid in those early years. Fernandez talked a lot about how important it is to follow great leaders, and Jake was the epitome of brilliance. Both men promoted themes of destiny, prosperity, and self-determination. Both were visionaries who thought that movements, not just churches, should be built. Additionally, both drew sizable crowds eager to hear themes of prosperity and breakthrough. However, beneath the public shows of solidarity and the stage smiles, insiders started to murmur about rivalry. Was this a rivalry masquerading as friendship? Or was it really a brotherhood? This is when the exciting part begins. According to people close to both leaders, Dallas began to take notice of Fernandez's quick ascent in Florida. Ultimately, being a friend is one thing, but being competitive is quite another. Others questioned whether Jake saw Fernandez less as a protege and more as a possible rival in influence as he started attracting thousands to the religion center and garnering notoriety through television broadcasts. Then there were the variations in methodology. Fernandez placed a strong emphasis on direct instruction, stressing the fundamentals of success and financial growth, whereas Jake frequently employed analogies and stories to convey his ideas. Some detractors in Jake's group believe Fernandez's emphasis on affluence ran the risk of compromising the legitimacy of their group's message. Some even went so far as to say that Fernandez was too self-reliant, too ambitious, and unwilling to continue living under Jake's immense influence. Silently, tensions simmered. There were rumors of private disputes. According to some, Jake counseled Fernandez to slow down, maintain his humility, and refrain from making his ministry overly ostentatious. Others hinted that Fernandez was no longer prepared to play the position of junior partner, having gained confidence from his expanding platform. Those who observed closely could tell that the once celebrated brotherhood between Fernandez and Jake wasn't as flawless as it appeared, even if none of these events were performed in public. At this point, the narrative starts to go from mentoring to manipulation, for the man who previously seemed to lift him up might have been setting him up for a collapse. Fernandez said. Additionally, their relationship's flaws weren't just any cracks. They served as indicators of the impending storm. However, what did Fernandez mean when he claimed to have been set up? After years of silence, what transpired behind closed doors that made him decide to speak up? As we go into the purported betrayal and the circumstances that compelled Fernandez to speak up, we'll learn more about that in the upcoming chapter. When Bishop Henry Fernandez finally came clean about being set up, his remarks created a storm rather than just a stir in the church community. Until then, the majority of people's perceptions of his ministry difficulties could be attributed to the typical highs and lows of leadership, monetary difficulties, criticism from critics, or the daily strain of leading a sizable congregation. But everything was reframed by Fernandez's assertion. He was supposedly dealing with sabotage in addition to other challenges. Fernandez claims that Bishop T.D. Jakes, the man many thought was his buddy, was involved in planning some of the most difficult times in his career. Fernandez took his time revealing this information. As rumors circulated, he actually said nothing for years. But after a while, the stress of it all got to him, and he started talking. What precisely did he disclose? Then, Fernandez began by citing instances in which seemingly open doors for his ministry abruptly closed. Invitations to important conferences vanished without warning. Unexpectedly, planned media engagements were canceled. Possibilities to increase his impact, alliances, teamwork, and even publishing agreements were abruptly canceled. This appeared to be typical setbacks to many. Fernandez, however, saw a pattern. Additionally, Jake's inner circle was indicated by that pattern. Second, Fernandez implied that some negative stories about him were purposefully disseminated inside powerful religious circles. Accusations concerning his intentions as a prosperity preacher, inflated tales of failed projects, and rumors of financial mismanagement started to spread. They were not just rumors from strangers. They appeared where Fernandez's reputation was most important and were very particular. Then the most startling aspect of all occurred. These weren't accidents, Fernandez said. It wasn't a coincidence. They were setups and planned actions intended to undermine his reputation, delay his progress, and eventually prevent him from overtaking his alleged mentor's influence. All roads led back to Bishop T.D. Jake, as Fernandez put it. To clarify, Fernandez did not portray himself as a victim who was not held accountable. Like any leader, he acknowledged that he had made mistakes along the way. However, his thesis was straightforward. His faults weren't the only reason for the criticism he received. It was about being singled out. And this insight clarified years of inexplicable hardships for a large number of his supporters. This is where things become even more dramatic, though. Fernandez hypothesized that some of his closest friends and trusted church leaders might have been seduced or influenced by outside forces, causing internal strife. Consider that betrayal from within his ministry's walls as well as from the outside. Rivalry was no longer the only factor here. It was a matter of survival. Fernandez depicted a world in which church politics function similarly to business boardrooms, replete with power struggles, covert agreements, and tactics to crush rivals. And he claimed that he had been chosen to bear the blame in that planet. These findings sparked a firestorm, as you can guess. Some others believed him right away, citing the obvious evidence of career sabotage. He was charged by others for assigning blame and fabricating drama where none existed. But one thing became quite evident, regardless of whether you agreed with him or not. Fernandez had lost his reserve. That leads us to the most important query of all. Why now? Why did Bishop Henry Fernandez now speak out against T.D. Jake and validate what many had only muttered in private after years of silence? The response to that question reveals another aspect of this crisis that has the potential to permanently alter our understanding of loyalty, power, and treachery in the church. Bishop Henry Fernandez said nothing for years. Even though there were rumors, suspicions, and innumerable backroom battles, he decided not to confront the rumors head-on or identify the people he thought were to blame. Furthermore, that silence was calculated. Let's face it, in the realm of ministry, one's reputation is crucial. If the timing hadn't been right, a public complaint against someone as influential as Bishop T.D. Jakes may have been career suicide. What changed then? What ultimately drove Fernandez to venture into the daring realm of public disclosure? Those closest to him said there were two answers: personal fatigue and faith in God. First, fatigue. Imagine keeping a secret for years while secretly understanding that your difficulties are planned rather than unplanned. Imagine being able to smile on stage and share your faith with your congregation while simultaneously having your reputation called into question, your ministry slowed down, and your possibilities snatched. This was more than just a leadership test for Fernandez. It was a survival test. On the outside, his silence was admirable, but on the inside, it was failing him. He had suffered in the shadows for far too long, pretended that everything was all right, and protected others for far too long. The weight eventually became too much to bear. Conviction comes in second. According to Fernandez, he came to the conclusion that maintaining silence was no longer about preserving unity within the body of Christ. Encouraging corruption was the goal. According to him, there are instances when the only way to prevent betrayal is to expose it. He talked about how, at times of prayer, he felt compelled by God to speak up, to illuminate the darkness, and to tell people the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. Fernandez finally said something. He started to meticulously address the matter in sermons, interviews, and private discussions. He didn't only allude to things in passing. He specifically mentioned T.D. Jake as a participant in what he described as a setup. This was astounding to many. Jake had been considered untouchable for a long time, a person too strong and well-respected to ever be openly accused by a member of his own community. Fernandez was aware of the dangers. He was aware that voicing his opinions could cost him connections, friendships, and even credibility with people who would never dare to accept such assertions. However, he was also aware that being silent was no longer an option. It becomes much more sentimental at this point. Fernandez acknowledged that the effect it was having on his family was a contributing factor in his choice. Alongside him, his wife, Pastor Carol Fernandez, and their kids had to bear the gossip, the criticism, and the unseen suffering. Fernandez said he had to be open about the forces against his family in order to protect them. Remaining silent would be letting them carry shame that isn't theirs. Thus, he opted for transparency over silence, honesty over comfort, and truth over reputation. The consequences of this choice were now immediate. He was praised as brave by some, exposing the covert corruption that many people thought existed in church leadership circles. Others charged him with treachery, claiming that his remarks were offensive to one of the most well-known religious leaders and caused division. But you were no longer able to ignore it, regardless of your stance. There was no turning back once Fernandez had spoken. However, Fernandez's ministry was not the only thing altered by this revelation. The foundations of the larger church were rocked. Because what did it say about the real nature of power and politics behind the pulpit if a well-known figure like T.D. Jakes could be accused of scheming to get a fellow bishop? This is when things become even more dramatic, because by speaking up, Fernandez not only showed his breaking point but also the less positive aspects of church leadership that most people are unaware of. The response was nothing short of explosive when Bishop Henry Fernandez finally spoke up and admitted that he thought he had been set up. There were heated discussions, inquiries, and strong opinions in the church community, the media, and among regular believers. For Fernandez's supporters, the disclosure was a sign of approval. Many of them had been perplexed for years as to why a leader so strong and capable seemed to encounter obstacle after obstacle. They had witnessed the postponed events, the unfounded charges, and the way his name was tarnished without any justification. At last, they had an explanation. They didn't think Fernandez was assigning responsibility. Fernandez was bravely speaking the truth in this situation. His followers poured in on social media, thanking him for his courage, offering prayers for his safety, and even sharing their own stories of church betrayal. However, not everyone was on board. Fernandez was quickly accused of sensationalism by critics. Others contended that he was making up a tale to divert attention away from his own leadership failings. Others said Fernandez was attempting to create controversy in order to increase his exposure by criticizing T.D. Jakes. In fact, some people saw his revelation as an outright assault on the church's unity. Fernandez was not a hero in the eyes of these detractors. He caused division. And what about Jakes, the bishop T.D.? In public, Jakes said nothing. He didn't formally respond to Fernandez's allegations, at least not right away, but his silence was read in a variety of ways. Some others thought that by not answering, he was being dignified and avoiding what he could have perceived to be unfounded charges. Others countered that Jakes would have loudly and plainly defended himself if Fernandez's accusations were really untrue, and that silence spoke louder than words. But rumors persisted behind the scenes. According to several sources, Jakes' staff moved swiftly to contain the damage and preserve his reputation among his millions of fans. According to others, Jakes privately voiced amazement and displeasure by Fernandez's remarks, seeing them as a betrayal from someone he had previously backed. Naturally, the media had a great time. The story was picked up by blogs, Christian news sources, and even non-religious platforms. Headlines such as Bishop Fernandez alleges T.D. Jakes and church leaders betrayed him during the war went viral. There were more than two men involved in the controversy. It was about the hidden rivalries, politics, and power struggles that were part of megachurch culture and what their feud symbolized. The response from other leaders and preachers followed. Even if they dared not name names, some tactfully supported Fernandez, admitting that sabotage and setups were regrettably widespread in government circles. Others openly supported Jakes, highlighting his reputation, his decades of service, and his worldwide impact. The remarks of Fernandez breached a line that they believed should never be crossed, and the consequences didn't end there. The shockwaves were also felt at Fernandez's faith center, his church. As some members struggled with the debate, attendance varied. Some departed because they were uneasy about their pastor making accusations against another leader. However, many remained, supporting Fernandez because they believed his honesty demonstrated his moral character. During this difficult time, his congregation became both his biggest burden and his strongest defense. However, the response from regular believers was possibly the most telling. The conflict between Fernandez and Jakes made many Christians face the unsettling fact that politics, rivalry, and treachery may still occur in the church. There was more to the story than just two men. It served as a mirror reflecting the shortcomings in the culture of church leadership. And that's why the consequences were so widespread. It was more than just Jake's or Fernandez's reputation or credibility. Trust was at issue. What did it indicate for the integrity of the church as a whole if the men they looked up to could accuse one another of such profound betrayal? This is the portion that really got people's attention, though. Fernandez maintained that this was larger than one ministry, larger than Jake, and larger than him. He asserted that it was a pattern, a system of silent takedowns and setups that occurs more frequently than believers think, and that assertion brought up even more serious issues. Thus, this became the actual problem. Was Fernandez's tale a singular incident of scandal, or was it only the beginning of the revelation of the covert politics of the contemporary church?